Hello and welcome back to the Expo Factor. I'm Lee, your host, and in this episode, we're going deeper into the art of great trade show conversations. Last week, as you remember, we talked to the brilliant Shide Doa about how to break the ice. Today, we're going to explore what happens after the ice is broken. How do you actually go beyond the small talk and make your words actually land with the person that you're talking to? My guest today is Andrew Thorp, a brilliant communication coach, speaker, and my fellow co-founder of The Human Equation. He's worked with global firms like PwC and EY to help professionals ditch those robotic sales pitches and speak in ways that truly connect. In this episode, we talk about the dangers of the pitch slap, how to create engaging stories on the fly, and what it really means to listen well. We also cover how to recover a conversation when it's going flat and why your ability to adapt your message is more important than memorizing it. And yes, there's even a couple of stories about networking in a traffic jam and a swimming pool in Saudi Arabia. Let's dive in and say hello to Andrew. Hello, Andrew. Welcome to the Expo Factor. Great to have you as a guest.
Hello, Lee. Delighted to join you. Very excited.
Excellent. I know we've been talking about this for a long time, so I'm really excited that today it's finally here, and we get to talk all things storytelling and communication.
Indeed. And on one of the warmest days of the year, again, hence the polo shirts.
It's Polo Shirt Friday. Excellent. So tell us a bit more story behind Andrew. How have you got here where you are today? So give us some background and to the listeners as well.
Thank you, Lee. So I come from an unusual background in terms of the work that I do because I come from the golf industry. My brother is a golf pro. I was going to be a golf pro when I was younger, but I wasn't good enough. I was good enough to teach, but not good enough to play. I would have starved for a living if I tried to earn a living out of playing golf. But I worked in the industry for 22 years, had a change of direction around 2008 after, I had sort of a healthy midlife crisis for reasons I won't go into now, but I decided to change direction and then thought that what do I love doing in the golf industry that I'd like to do more of now? And the answer was public speaking, because I've always loved public speaking. Most people hate it. I really enjoy it. So I set out to become a professional speaker, kind of got more interested in helping other people to communicate more confidently, whether from the stage or whether in person. And then kind of began to realize that what they had to say wasn't as interesting as it could be. And therefore what they lacked was a story to tell. About themselves, about their product or their organization, or just generally to connect with people. Because I think what I now teach people to do is to connect when they open their mouth, or also when they're listening. Because I think story listening is almost as important as storytelling. So I tend to work with technically trained professionals like doctors or accountants, lawyers, architects, engineers, people who have a wealth of technical knowledge in their head that they're not always able to adapt it to different audiences and different situations. So I broadly help them to say the same thing in different ways and then develop a sort of a suite of material which allows them to improvise and to connect more successfully.
And what have you been doing the last couple of years? I know that you've been traveling quite a bit to run your courses. So some far-flung places?
Yeah, I tend to work mostly, if I do overseas work, and last year was about 80% abroad, 80. So I tend to work in Europe or sometimes the Middle East. I've done a little bit in the States, but not for a while now, nothing in the Far East yet. But generally speaking, these are large organizations that have, for example, consultants. I mean, I do a lot of work with PwC. And again, they sort of fit that mold of very, very intelligent, technically trained experts who just want that confidence to adapt their message and to be more engaging, really, if they're sort of dealing with rather dry topics. So yes, those are sort of the geographical areas. I'm doing a little bit more work in the UK now, largely because I'm running events, which I think remind people that I exist in the UK where I live. So there's a better balance, I think, this year between UK and abroad.
Fantastic. So that's where our story started. I think we met at one of your events called Join the Dots. So why don't you tell us a bit more about the concept behind Join the Dots and how it's different to the normal networking events that people may go to?
I think most people have a distaste for being sold to. But often when you go to networking events where the idea is to, represent your product or your company, there is this tendency, I think, to sell to each other. And I don't think anybody really likes it. So Join the Dots is a way of creating more interesting more on a more human level, shall we say, between people who maybe meet for the first time, by giving them something to talk about, which diverts them away from their product description and more to do with an issue that maybe touches their lives in some way and relates to most people. And therefore, because they get into these conversations in small groups in this case, they're able to sort of get to know each other a little bit better. So the stuff they do for a living comes around the back door, so to speak, rather than it being front and center. Yeah. But I think that's a theme that will resonate with you, because obviously I know your work in the exhibition space is very much about this, don't sort of sell in a clunky, awkward, front of mind sense. Build relationships, get to know people a little bit.
Absolutely. I think in the trade show world, what we often see is a pitch slap. We call it a pitch slap when you approach a booth and you ask the representative, so tell me a bit more about your company. And then you get a 10 to 15 minute spiel on all things about the company, how wonderful they are. And the usual problem with that is people switch off like after a minute. But it is so natural, because the environment that we're in the trade show world is that exhibitors think that they're actually selling something. They're actually going to sell something, and they're not actually there to connect with their audience. So it's a natural thing to do. And I think it's the same with networking events as well, where we're always taught to learn our elevator pitch. I say that we've got 60 seconds to capture someone's attention, and the more words we get into that 60 seconds, or the more, better phrase, or the better chances that we'll have landing the message. And that's really what I want to talk about today, is how do you go from doing a pitch slap, the lingo that we use, to actually connecting with somebody on a human level, and then taking that conversation further. Make it mean something, rather than just another nod and a shake of the head and say thank you for your time, and away you go. So on the last episode, we talked about breaking the ice with our guest Shide. So what we want to do today, Andrew, is really get to the next stage of the conversation and say, how do you, after breaking the ice, how do you avoid sounding rehearsed, or how do you actually get into that conversation? And as your podcast is called, how do you get people to actually lean forward and actually listen to you?
Because people do lean forward to listen if they think there's something interesting being said. I think one of the keys, Lee, is to learn to say the same thing in different ways. And with the elevator pitch, there were always two sort of schools of thought, weren't there? Say the same thing over and over again so that it lodges in people's minds, and then you're confident to be able to deliver it. I don't really subscribe to that, because I think you get bored saying the same thing all the time, and it becomes too one-dimensional. And the other school, which I tend to subscribe to, is find different ways of saying the same thing, by maybe starting in a different point each time, depending on the circumstances, or maybe where the conversation has started, and then bring it back to where it needs to be. So you've almost got, like in the center, you've got lots of sort of, spokes that go out. So you might start with any number of spokes, but it will still get to what it is that you actually do, and put you in the correct box, so to speak. So I think learning to say this, the same thing in different ways is important. That then lends itself to the development of what I call a library. So you've got these sort of phrases that you're confident to deliver because you've said them before. But if you've got enough of them, then you can sound more spontaneous and more interesting, and you're more adaptable because you've got a lot of choice, of what's in that sort of stockpile or library. So that I think is the key, is to find the particular hook or way in that will generate what you think is going to be a good response based on the person in front of you or the circumstances. I often say to people when they ask me what I do, I often say, well, I'm one of those people that reinvented themselves in the middle of their life. And that intrigues people because they want to know, well, A, what did you used to do? B, what do you do now? C, why did you change? And D, how did you manage the transition? So it sort of begs a lot of questions, and it does open up the discussion because it is sort of an intriguing intro, I guess.
Yeah. So basically, opening with something that arouses curiosity in terms of getting the person in front of you to ask more questions. Okay. Because the more questions they ask, the more interest they have and the more involved they are.
Yeah.
Right. And then obviously you say something that kind of is personal to them. Okay. So kind of resonates with them. So can you give me any examples where, let's say in a very dry environment at PwC, for example, where they're talking about tax affairs or the legal jargon and things like that, how would you make that sound interesting?
Well, I think you've got to get at the nub of what's important to the person that's in front of you. Yeah. So obviously, rather than going in with your pitch, I'd be tempted to actually ask a question first. Or maybe in the ice-breaking conversation, there's a little indication of what they're interested in or why they've come to the event. So if, for example, you say, well, what brought you here today? You know, why did you choose to come today? Yeah. They might say, well, I'm coming because we have an issue that we're trying to resolve at the moment. And so that's a lovely clue, isn't it, as to what's important to them. And then you just simply adjust or choose from your library what would be the best way to further that conversational thread.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. In my field, what we try and do is obviously get readers to actually think about 3 or 4 challenges or aspirations that their target audiences faces, or the reasons why they would be actually at the exhibition or the event that they're actually going to, and then try and elicit those with open-ended questions so that then they can actually reverberate in terms of how they can actually support. And that's where the storytelling comes in. Whereas if you've actually identified an issue that attendee is actually facing, that's the place to start telling that story, isn't it?
And also, I have a friend called Michelle who used to work for EY, Ernst & Young as they used to be now. And she had a really great way of describing herself and her role, because she was basically their business development manager in the north of England, northwest. Yeah. And she used to say, well, I'm the Google of EY. So in other words, she's like a human search engine. So she's looking for people to tell her what they're looking for, what they're interested in, why they're at this event or whatever. And then she's got the range of knowledge. Oh, you need to speak to so-and-so. I've got just the person for you. So I thought that was a really clever way of describing what she did.
Excellent. All right. So you've opened up the conversation. People are leaning forward. But what happens when they start to lose interest or you've lost them? How do you actually recover that conversation?
Well, I think this relates very much to public speaking as well, or presenting, where you're losing the audience. And oftentimes the presenter doesn't realize, because they are presenting in what I often call a bubble of anxiety. So they just simply want to get it over with, throw all these words at the audience, and somehow in 30 minutes time, I'll be able to get off the stage. So similarly, I think in a conversation, you've got to be aware of what they call it a co-locutor, which is a horrible term. The person in front of you is feeling and thinking. And then if you can see in their expression that they're confused or they're bored or whatever, you can't just keep going in the same direction. You've got to stop and change something. So even if you say, I feel I'm boring you at the moment, they'll probably say, oh, no, it's just that I've started thinking about this. So you've got to interrupt the flow of what's making them zone out. And then when that flow is interrupted, people will then suddenly pay attention.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's, to sometimes... especially at large events where people actually have a lot on their mind. Okay. It's very easy for them to, obviously, exhibitions have multi-sensory environments. So they might see something at the corner of the eye that triggers something in their mind, so they actually zone out because they start to think, something back in the office that is related to that. So, I mean, what kind of verbal cues should you be really looking for in terms of to help build the conversation even further?
Well, we've spoken about this before, the fact that I have this little mini course online called 60 Phrases. And these are little phrases that help you become a little bit more eloquent. They help the language, bond together, or it joins things up nicely. Yeah. And one of the super phrases, one of my favorites, is to say, I was really struck by something you mentioned before. Yeah. So when you say that, people suddenly think, oh, I must have said something interesting. I wonder what it was. So it kind of feeds their ego a little bit that you're picking up on something that you found interesting that they've said. And they'll suddenly pay attention because you're talking about them. You're making them think, well, what was it that I said? And it also proves that you've been listening because you brought something forward from before. So if you can pick up on something they've said, that phrase that you usually was really interesting. You said, then they're going to be very connected with the conversation because it's about them. Yeah. So little phrases like that are wonderful ways of staying connected and showing that you're interested in them and not just wanting to tell them stuff.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. All right, let's move on to storytelling then. How do you, start to figure that story in terms of you've identified the challenge that the person in front of you is actually facing. Okay, so how do you construct a simple story? Okay, so do you want to maybe give us some examples of like the various stages that you actually go through? Is there a constructive way to tell that story?
Well, I think it depends what you mean by story, because it's a much misunderstood term. I think people often associate it with an anecdote. But I run an event series called the Multi-Story Club. And the idea, again, is to build up this sort of suite of material in your mind. And there are the big five, and I hope to goodness I can remember the five now. But the big five are...
Don't want to put you on the spot.
are your life and career journey. Okay? Because when you ask me, tell me a bit about yourself, that's inviting me to tell my story of how I got to where I am now. An elevator pitch, which obviously can either be done in a sort of around the table scenario, one at a time, or just in a more fluid conversation. A presentation, which I think is a piece of storytelling. So you should follow some kind of natural arc so that people can follow you on the journey you're taking them on. An anecdote, obviously classically, is a piece of storytelling.
Of course,
And a case study. Hey, I've remembered the five. A case study. Where, for example, if somebody has expressed, they've explained an issue they have at the moment, but I'm not quite sure that what you're offering is quite the right fit for us. You might say, well, actually, let me tell you about a client that we worked with some months ago who probably would have said the same thing. So you're pulling out a case study in that sense from your library to reassure the person in front of you that maybe you are, potentially the right answer for them. So I think if you can develop this, these big five, and obviously multiples within each of the five, so that you're not just relying on one anecdote and one case study, it's a really those are really, really important ones to be able to say to people, either in a pre-planned sense. If you're presenting, you might say, well, I'll start with that anecdote, I'll start with that metaphor, or just in conversation, where you just pull something out according to where the conversation happens to be.
Yeah. Now you use a concept called story selling, not storytelling. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I think again, that's just really that's soft persuasion. It's where you're painting pictures in people's minds. It doesn't sound like a sales pitch. It sounds like a story that they're drawn into, where maybe they want to know more. They perhaps see themselves in the scenario that you're painting, and they don't feel like they're being sold to. You don't feel like you're selling either. It just feels like a conversation. It feels like a two parties coming closer together because of your ability to paint pictures in their minds. And that's why people often say, oh, I see what you mean. That they can picture themselves in the scenario. And that will often start with, when you walk into a room and you don't know anybody. So that kind of phrase, which is one of the 60 phrases when, is setting up almost like a cliche in people's minds. So immediately they'll start nodding because they're on board with that. They know what it's like. So you've started to connect already. So within those
Absolutely.
5, you've obviously got different structures as well. So we haven't probably got time to
Yeah.
go into all of those.
Of
But with
course.
something like a presentation that you're giving, you might start with some kind of attention grabber. You might then sort of
Yeah.
move from perhaps a metaphorical opening to linking to the theme that people are expecting to hear, and then sort of weave yourself into it, deliver the meat or the content that they're there to hear, summarize, and then maybe give them a call to action. So that's a sort of a 6-part structure that I kind of recommend for people when they're presenting. But of course, in conversation, when you're maybe delivering something like an anecdote, you've got the contextualization, the setup of the story. Don't take too long with the setup because people lose interest otherwise. Then you've got to get to the nub of what happened, get to the drama, the action quickly. Then there has to be some kind of resolution and perhaps a reflection on what happened in the story, which is the reason why you're telling it.
Yeah, yeah. That's great. I mean, you mentioned something before, the phrase, do you know when? That's one of my favorites that I use all the time.
Well, you know that
And the thing
feeling
with
when,
it
you know
is,
that feeling when, yeah.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it works every time because people can actually relate to it because they've probably been in
Yeah,
that situation, or they probably know someone who's actually been in
exactly,
that
exactly.
situation.
You know when you're selling your business
That's
for £10 million? Well, actually, no, I don't. You've got to be careful what you choose, that it is going to connect. You know
yeah,
Star Wars, the third one. Well, they might not have seen Star Wars, so you've got to choose
yeah,
something
exactly. Yeah,
that's pretty
yeah.
reliably going to, they'll recognize.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's where the key is always to ask those right questions, open-ended questions that opens up people to tell you things, and that will give you enough ammunition to be able to tell those stories. And I think a lot of the times people actually go unprepared. Okay. They don't. And I think the advice I always give again is to actually know your target audience, have a PhD in your audience's problems, okay? Because that's when you can actually use all these tools. But if you're not familiar, if you haven't walked a mile in your customer's shoes or potential customer's shoes, then you can't really use these anecdotes or
Exactly.
stories and
And I
things
think
like
one of
that.
the, when people go for a job interview, one of the main complaints of interviewers is that they didn't ask any questions about the company
Yeah,
they want to work for. So if you
yeah,
say, well, there was a very interesting phrase in your website that I was reading the other day, and it said this, and it really got me
yeah,
thinking, and that's amazing because it shows you've taken the
yeah,
trouble to read their site, to reflect on it a little bit, to find something really interesting in it that you're going to bring
yeah.
into the conversation. And that
Oh,
elevates you so
absolutely,
high
yeah.
in the minds of the panel that you're in front of.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think, I mean, as employers, I've been on a recruitment drive recently, and if people don't ask me more than 5 questions, then I really have to question their willingness or their hunger or desire to actually work for
Yeah.
the company. Because if you don't have that curiosity, then I can see that through the quality of the
And
questions
again,
that
if
people
if
ask.
you're trying to influence somebody who's maybe quite senior and they've been speaking on a panel recently, or they've written an article on LinkedIn or in an industry magazine, and you've read it or watched it, and you mention it, and you say, I was really interested in what you said about such and such. It again will feed
Yeah,
their ego. I mean,
yeah,
I know it can sound a bit manipulative when I'm saying it this way, but it does work if you are genuinely interested in the company or in
yeah,
that person or in what they've said.
yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Just on that point, between mid managers and senior managers, is there a difference as to how senior leaders perceive those stories or middle managers perceive those stories?
I tend to work with middle managers in very large organizations that are considered to
Yeah,
be maybe the next tier of leaders or partners, let's say. The people who are at the highest point of an organization often don't feel they they need any help with this. So there's a little bit of an
yeah,
ego thing going on sometimes. So I think the ones who are working their way up, and I'm not talking about very junior people, I'm talking about people who are
yeah,
maybe in line
yeah,
for promotion to a leadership
oh,
position, they
yeah,
really benefit from these sorts of skills because these are very subtle influencing skills. And if they develop them, they'll tend to stand out from their colleagues or their rivals for a position or a partnership. So I couldn't honestly say that there's a difference between. I'll tell you one thing I did listen to recently. There's a great, if I may mention another podcast here, there's another podcast called When It Hits the Fan, and it's about PR and crisis management. And one of the guys was saying, David Yelland he was saying that when he interviews lots of CEOs, they're often quite dull because they're so focused on the message they want to get across, about the company, about to the shareholders and so forth. And then when he asks them, well, what did you think of the game last night? They don't know what he's talking about, even though Liverpool might have won the Premiership last night or whatever, or Rory McIlroy might have just won the Masters. They're blissfully unaware of the peripheral things that are going on in the world, which makes them sound like a human being that's actually interested in things. So that's an observation that I was intrigued by about senior leaders that he comes across.
Oh, it can be. And I think as long as you're aware of that, I think when you're selling to senior leaders, you need to treat them like human beings, as you say, but also break through that barrier that they actually have. Okay. So I'm a CEO. I make tough decisions. Leave me alone. I have a gatekeeper. Okay. But if you just, break through that by just being a human being, okay, and treat them like a human being, then it gets much, much easier. I mean, there's the old adage, I think I remember in my sales training a long time ago, when you go into a sauna, for example, okay, and people are exactly the same. So they don't have the suits on. They don't have, their kind of invisible aura that they actually have. Okay. So, and it's a great place to actually connect people because it's just you and the steam, right?
You and the steam. It's a leveling thing. But the other time when you see that, just thinking back to my golf career, I used to work for the Professional Golfers Association, and I used to be a referee and a tournament organizer. And these captains of industry would be reduced to trembling wrecks on the first tee when I would announce them with a microphone. And they used to sort of slip me £5 to say, Andrew, could you just let me tee off? Don't announce me. I just want to sort of slip off so no one notices. So they're very, very nervous because they're outside their normal comfort zone.
Yeah. So is golf the secret then to engaging with senior level people?
I don't know. I mean, in America, they used to say that a round of golf is sometimes useful as an interview because it tends to reveal character. Because golf is a game of mental frustration. If you can hold your calm and still remain sociable and not go into a grump and have your head down and throwing clubs all over the place when you're not playing very well, then it does reveal a little bit about the type of person that you are.
Excellent. All right. Well, you may have given us some ideas in terms of putting interactive activities on the booth that, reduces the senior leaders to
trembling wrecks.
Trembling wrecks. All right. And then in terms of checking whether the message is actually landed with the prospect, what advice and tips would you actually give people? How do you actually check that the message is landed, they've understood everything that they've said, and then obviously the next step, which is the call to action, whether they're willing to take that next step of the action or whether you need to elicit more questions. So what kind of tips would you actually have just to check temperature, so to speak?
Well, again, if you're using the techniques that we've talked about previously, then they're less likely to lose interest because it's more focused on them. You're pulling out the right things from your library. You're explaining things in a way that paints pictures, that's quite sort of engaging and effective. And if you allow your personality and your enthusiasm to come across, then they're likely to stay engaged. But if they're not, then you've got to read that. And again, like I said before, you've got to change tack a little bit. You've got to sort of check with them, like a sense check about, I'm sensing that this isn't working for you, or I'm sensing a bit of confusion when I mentioned that phrase, whatever it was. Can I just check, how are you feeling about this? So you've just, rather than sort of plowing on and just working through your script, you've got to sort of check in with them and see if you can maybe not start again necessarily, but reconnect with them by getting them to
Yeah.
give you something back about what they're thinking at that moment.
Yeah. All right. So saying something like "I sense," "I feel," and check that. So because that isn't kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Confrontational.
No.
Okay. It's a nice, gentle way to check the temperature, and then that way they will actually give you that information that you're looking for.
It's almost like a coaching phrase that, you've almost seen this in with therapists. Where I'm sensing, Lee, that there's some resentment here, there's some this. So they're trying to sort of make sure that they're connecting and they're understanding what the person's thinking and feeling.
Yeah, wonderful. So what are the key ways to listen? We mentioned at the very beginning of the conversation the importance of listening. Okay, how can we make the other person felt heard? Okay, are there any acknowledgements? Because again, on the trade show floor, and then also at networking events, the challenge is that people don't feel heard because sometimes, use an example at trade shows, people actually, the booth staff are in conversation, they're talking to someone, but they're always scanning who's actually walking past. And then the other person is thinking, are they really listening?
Oh, I call these people
meerkats,
because you know how a meerkat stretches its neck up and looks around for someone else to speak to? That's really rude, but you do meet meerkats occasionally. So again, I think listening, I think, is one of the most underappreciated skills, underdeveloped skills. There's so much stuff in personal development literature about what you say being more impressive and so forth. But actually, it's about connection. And you can't connect with people if it's all one-way traffic. And my youngest son, Peter, has what I would describe as a superpower. He's very good at putting people at ease. And a lot of that is about the way he's reacting to the things that he's asked them. So it's not just that you ask the first question and then switch off and carry on with what you intended to say. You've rather like acting. Acting is about reacting. So if they give you something back, the critical thing in many respects is not the first thing you've asked. It's how you respond to their answer to your initial question. And then it starts to build like a snowball where the connection evolves and develops into something deeper. And it's a true sort of back and forth. I had a client a while ago who didn't really take a lot of interest in his staff because he wasn't really a people person. We did a bit of training, and then he would ask if you were one of his employees. He'd say, "Now, Lee, how was your weekend?" And then you'd start to explain how your weekend was. Off at that stage because he'd asked a question. Andrew told me to ask a question and take an interest, but he didn't listen to the answer. So the key then is how you respond to what you've just given me to my question, and then it begins to build.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you've had the conversation, you've connected. Why is it important to figure out the next step in the conversation? Because again, we feel that networking events at exhibitions, a lot of conversations go nowhere. So how can you make the conversation go somewhere where you actually want it to go? Okay. How would you actually close the conversation? And how would you check the temperature whether that person is actually going to take that action?
So I think you've got two extremes, haven't you? You've got the people who go to these things and just sell, talk about the product, don't get to understand what anybody else is interested in. They just sell. And if I've spoken to 50 people during the day and I've told them about our product, I've done a great job. And of course, they've done a lousy job. And then you've got people who are quite sociable, who just come along and they have a great time because they just chat to loads of people, but there's no purpose behind it. You know, they forget to take any names and addresses. They don't get any contact details. They don't follow up, but they've had a great time and they've met some lovely people. So you've got to find that balance, haven't you, between having the thing that you're there to do, not necessarily front of mind, because that's not the first thing you would probably say, but you create that connection, you listen very carefully, you're looking for those little offers of opportunities, and then the reason why you're there kicks in. And then you might do something like, well, I'm going to introduce you to my colleague. He's not here today, but I'm going to set something up between the two of you because I think he'll really be able to help you. So there is definitely some kind of purposeful action that comes after the rapport building and the nice connection.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Wonderful. So in terms of, obviously we have a high turnover of conversations at events. So we might go and meet 15, 20 people. At exhibitions, we might meet over 100 people. Okay. How can we, what would you say is the best tip? How can we not sound robotic? How can we make sure that majority of those conversations actually land? Okay, I mean, obviously, exhibitions are quite hard places. Okay, because you're talking non-stop, and you've got to get through. Maybe you feel as though you've got to get through as many people as possible. But how can you stay grounded? How can you stay personal, and how can you make sure that you connect with as many people as possible? But again, for me, it's always been about the quality and not the quantity. So,
but again, if we talk about two, I mean, I do more sort of networking events per se, as opposed to exhibitions necessarily, compared to you. But if ever I was advising people who went to, let's say, a 2-hour networking event, I'd say, well, if you come away having had 30 conversations and you got 30 business cards, that's probably too many. And if you've had one conversation with one person for 2 hours, that's no good either. So I think if you've really connected with maybe 5 or 6 people in that 2 hours, I think that's pretty good. I think that would be something I would personally aim for. Now, you may say it's different in exhibitions, but again, I guess you've got to adapt according to what the throughput of people is. If there's 500 people walking up to your stand, then you're having to field those conversations, and then you're going to have a shorter amount of time to spend with the people that, you don't want to ignore them, but you're not perhaps going to have as much time to develop the rapport with them. So you might be more inclined, therefore, to capture their details but make sure it's followed up afterwards, because you've always got that option. But if it's slow going and you've only got maybe 5 or 6 people in an hour who come by, then you're going to have more time to have more quality, deeper conversations with them. It's a little bit reminds me a little bit of in a cafe, because I quite like chatting to people. You might have noticed this. If I'm at the front of the queue and the barista is quite conversational, but there's 10 people waiting to be served by one barista, I'm a bit self-conscious that I don't think it's appropriate to have a conversation with him or her, and they should read that situation as well. But if I'm the only one at the counter and they happen to be up for a nice chat, I might stay there for a few moments and perhaps even sip my coffee while they're in front of me.
Oh, absolutely. And we mentioned again in the intro, the art of making conversation doesn't just apply to networking events, but also you can actually use these techniques on a personal level, whether you're chatting in the pub, whether you're dealing with a situation at school, something to do with your kids and so on. So what elements of these storytelling would you take into a personal situation?
Well, I think, again, it's just a case of building a connection, building rapport with people. The two of the most unusual places I've managed to create a nice connection with people are, first of all, on the outside lane of the M6 motorway in the Midlands in the UK, because there was a massive traffic jam to the point where there was a standstill for 45 minutes and people were just getting out of their cars and stretching their legs. And I got chatting with the guy who was in the car in front of me and we exchanged details. That's the one. And the second one...
That's a shared experience, right? I think that always brings people together, a shared experience. So if you're going through something similar...
And the second one was in a swimming pool in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia last year, when there was only one other person in the pool, and I happened to be just having a rest at the end, having done too many lengths and was exhausted. And we just got chatting, and he said, well, why are you here? So, well, I'm doing some training in storytelling. I explained how I came to do what I do. And he started to open up to me about how he was thinking of changing his career path, because he was dissatisfied with what he was doing. It was well paid, but he was unhappy, unfulfilled. And hearing my story of reinvention got him thinking that maybe he ought to do the same thing. And how am I going to put it to my wife that I'm going to pack in my job and start a new business? This was in 3 feet of water in a swimming pool.
Wow.
So it's not so much that you've got the perfect opening line. It's just that you've got to be receptive and aware of what's around you. And you and I know, because of our shared passion for the human equation, our project, our joint project, that I despair sometimes when people cut themselves off from their immediate environment by putting headphones on, ear speakers or whatever, and or big headphones, and they don't know who's sitting next to them. They'd rather connect with people who are thousands of miles away, or just listen to some pre-recorded stuff, and they're not aware of what's immediately next to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big kind of pandemic going in our society, isn't it? I think that's one of the reasons why we founded the human equation, is to really look at why are people disconnecting and why are people addicted to their technology, rather than actually read the environment around them.
Yeah.
And find those opportunities for connection. Just on, obviously, you shared the story about Saudi Arabia. So what do you think of culture? What kind of impact does culture have on storytelling? I mean, do you need to adapt, according to people's culture, or should we treat everyone as a human being?
That's a very interesting question. I do get asked that a lot because I travel abroad quite a lot. And like you meet people from many different cultures and nations. But I tend to focus on things that have pretty much broad appeal because they're human characteristics. So we all recognize, love or hate, or, the feeling out of place or out of depth, anxiety about an approaching challenge, wanting to succeed, getting out of a hole. These are universal human condition scenarios. So if the stories that you tell, fall into one of those categories or tropes, as they're sometimes called, then you're on pretty safe ground. I did a session once in Istanbul, and I asked the client, I said, look, I quite like to use movie references occasionally. Do you think I sort of need to research some Turkish movies? He said, no, don't worry, Andrew. They all watch American films. Don't worry about it. So I was able to use some of my stock material, I guess. I think you've also got to be aware that certain cultures are more forthcoming and they're more extrovert or introvert. So, the Dutch tend to be quite forward, and I think they're very funny. And, but maybe some of the people I coach who are from Asia tend to absorb things in a more quiet, sort of internalized way. But both are getting something out of the workshop because they keep coming back, which is great. So they'll react to what you're talking about in different ways. But I think as long as you're connecting with them on these basic universal human levels, then it's going to work for you.
Fantastic. I think on that note, we're going to finish the conversation. We could talk forever, as we do normally when we meet. But for the purpose of this podcast, I think that's a great way to end. So my final question to you is, if you could actually give 3 tips to anyone who's struggling with their networking or engaging with people at trade shows, what can they do to really help them engage and connect with their target audience?
Well, I think first of all you've got to practice. There's a great book here which I'll just put in front of the screen called Reclaiming Conversation by a lady called Sherry Turkle. She's an American professor. And she makes the point, and she's quite right, that if you don't practice something like conversation, interpersonal contact, physical, embodied experiences, then you're going to lose confidence. Like a muscle, it needs to be exercised, and then it grows and strengthens. So you've got to sort of, I don't like this phrase, lean into the discomfort, but you've got to do things that might not initially be comfortable for you. And then you get better and better, and then you'll get more and more results. So first of all, you have to practice. Secondly, I think you've really got to build this library of material. So, little anecdotes, case studies, metaphors, analogies, things you've seen in the newspapers recently. Build up that stockpile, and then you've got the flexibility then to handle different situations. And then I think the third piece of advice I give people is find someone you can model yourself on, who's maybe got a similar personality type to you, who just happens to be a very effective operator. And if you can actually speak to them about it, take the opportunity, or maybe if you just see them in action, try and look at what they do and develop some of those techniques. I mean, I used to do that as a kid, as a golfer. I used to copy people's swings or parts of a golf swing that somebody did particularly well. And when you're younger, you tend to copy things, and it's something that young people do very effectively. But I think we can all sort of model ourselves on people we admire.
Excellent. All right. Thanks for that. 3 great tips there. And finally, Andrew, where can we find you? If people want to connect with you, what do they need to do?
Well, first of all, I'd say that check out our joint project, which is thehumaniquation.org, because there's some great stuff on there, as you know, about this desire that we both have to facilitate better quality connection between people in this sort of digital age. And secondly, just my LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn primarily as my website and my the way that I communicate. So my surname has no E on it, THORP, no E, but I'm easily found on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And of course, they can meet you in person as well at Join the Dots.
At Join the Dots or the Multi-Story Club. So we have...
Or the Multi-Story Club, but they will have to travel to Manchester for that. So fantastic. Andrew, it's been a pleasure to speak with you for this podcast. And I sincerely thank you for taking your time to do this. I know that you're a very busy person, and sorry to get you away from the golf course.
No, that's quite all right. I shall be going to practice now this evening. But no, it's been a pleasure, Lee. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and I wish you well with your various ventures and travels.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. We'll see you soon.
All the best.
Cheers. And there you have it. That wraps up this episode of the Expo Factor. A huge thanks to Andrew for joining me and sharing such a wealth of insight on how to move beyond the pitch and truly connect with the people in front of you. Now, before we go, let's quickly recap Andrew's 3 top tips for becoming a better communicator. Practice is number 1. Like any skill, storytelling and conversation need to be used regularly. The more you engage, the more confident and natural you'll become as a storyteller. Number 2, build your story library. Gather anecdotes, analogies, case studies, and even recent headlines relating to your industry so that you have more options to draw from in any situation that you find yourself at a networking or at a trade show event. And lastly, but not least, find someone to model. Learn from people who communicate well, especially those with a similar style to yours, and adapt what works well for you. Remember, great conversations at networking events and conferences and trade shows aren't really about delivering a perfect script. They're about listening well, responding in the moment, and being genuinely curious about the other person. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening, and leave a review if you've got a moment. It helps to reach more listeners like you. Also, you can connect with Andrew on LinkedIn. His surname is Thorp, Thorp, with no E at the end. Or you can visit thehumaniquation.org to learn more about our shared mission to help people connect better in a digital-first world. So thanks again for tuning in. Until the next time, stop pitching, start connecting, and keep the conversation human. Thank you.